Hello and welcome everyone. Let's get started, I think. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Madhuram Dekar and I'm a Community Engagement Manager at Crossref. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from today. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the third and final webinar of the Crossref Learning Series, Building Trust Through Metadata. We started the series of webinars in 2025 with an aim to focus on supporting the publishing community in India and beyond. And the webinars in this series have explored how rich metadata and Crossref's infrastructure can strengthen publishing practices, improve research visibility, and preserve the integrity of the scholarly record. In addition to speakers from Crossref, the first two webinars of the series also featured speakers from DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, who have shared how their resources and guidance contribute to maintaining integrity within the scholarly publishing ecosystem. If you weren't able to attend those webinars, I'll encourage you to review the recordings that we have made available on our website. And in today's webinar, we are going to cover how post-publication updates can be deposited for Crossref and why they are important for preserving the integrity of the scholarly record. I would like to introduce our speakers for today. So if we can move to the next slide, please. As I was saying, my name is Madhuram Dekar. I am a Community Engagement Manager at Crossref. I work with scholarly editors, editorial organizations to develop engagement programs that help this community to leverage rich metadata for preserving the integrity of the scholarly record. I'm also joined by my colleague Shane Smulyan, who's a technical support specialist at Crossref. Shane assists members and users in getting the right metadata in right places. Previously, he has worked in library access services at Providence College and technical support at EBSCO Information Services. Today, Shane is going to tell us about how to register retractions and other types of post-publication updates using the Crossref infrastructure and how to use Crossref's Crossmark service. I'm also very thankful to Amanda French, my colleague, who's the ROR Technical Community Manager, who is also here to help with chat support at today's webinar. Thank you, Amanda, for joining. Before we get started with the presentation, just a quick note on using Zoom. We'll not be able to enable cameras for all of you, but you can react using different emojis. For Q&A, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box so that we can take them up and get them answered. You can also enable captions in the meeting if you would find that useful. As you can see, the session is being recorded, and we hope that this will be an enjoyable and productive meeting for everyone. And we expect everyone to hold to the Crossref Code of Conduct. In the interest of participants' privacy in our meetings, we do not permit AI agents and tools to join Crossref meetings. We will first have a presentation, and at the end, there will be time for Q&A. But as you're listening to the presentations, if you have any questions, please do feel free to add them in the Q&A box so that we can track them and answer them as well. So with that, let's get started. So if you are a Crossref member, or if you were at one of our previous webinars, you may already know that Crossref is a not-for-profit membership organization that exists to make scholarly communications better. We make research objects easy to find, cite, link, assess, and reuse. Crossref membership today comprises of 24,000 members in 166 countries. And together, these members have registered 179 million metadata records with a DOI. Members register content by sending us metadata, including a DOI. Crossref supports a wide range of content types for scholarly and research publications, and these include journals, articles, books, datasets, dissertations, peer reviews, grants, and more. Each of these content types also has specific metadata requirements and best practices for registration. This metadata is openly available for retrieval via our APIs, and it is used extensively by the scholarly community and several downstream services. So this makes it a really rich and open source of data for analyzing all sorts of scholarly trends. Now, these content types that I just mentioned before, like journal articles or dissertations or data sets and more, they are all a part of the scholarly record. The scholarly record is evolving, and over time, the diversity and complexity of research outputs has increased vastly. So now these outputs, they form one part of the scholarly record. But just looking at them as a collection of independent research outputs is not enough. What's also of interest is how these different components are related and the acts that are performed on them over time. So for example, over time, these outputs may receive comments or reviews or additions. They may undergo corrections or other updates. And these updates may alter how the original work is to be interpreted. So this is how the scholarly record grows. And to capture all of the actions that are performed on these research outputs, the scholarly record must evolve and it should be fluid in order to be able to preserve its integrity. And so this research nexus is like a snapshot of the evolving record at any given time. The research nexus is the vision to which we aspire to, and this slide shows a schematic representation of that. So at the center, you have all the research objects and the actors of the scholarly ecosystem, and the circles around them represent how these objects are related to each other and how they act on each other. So together they form a rich and reusable open network of relationships connecting research organizations, people, things, and actions. A scholarly record that the global community can build on forever for the benefit of the society. So the research nexus goes beyond the idea of just having persistent identifiers for content types. While that is still important and it stays important, the actions that are performed on these and those which are shown around the ring here, they are important for preserving the integrity of the scholarly record. And all of this is a part of the research nexus, the foundation of which is metadata. The metadata that's registered by our members, that forms the foundation of this research nexus. And because all of the actions and these relationships are captured by metadata. This is because metadata provides a lot of context and information about every content type. It tells us who has authored the work. So when you have contributor metadata, such as author names or roles or their ORCID IDs, it tells us who has authored that piece of work. Funding metadata tells you who has supported that work. Relationship metadata tells you how, let's say, a preprint is connected to an article and other interesting relationships. Finally, metadata also tells us if a work was updated after publication. And these post-publication updates are the focus of today's webinar. They are very important, not just post-publication updates, but other metadata as well, is key for preserving the integrity of the scholarly record. And this is because only when metadata is correct, it's comprehensive, and it's complete, it supports the integrity of the scholarly record. And Crossref's role here is to provide infrastructure that enables those who produce scholarly outputs to provide metadata and relationships about how they ensure the quality of content and how the outputs fit into the scholarly record. And post-publication updates play an important part in this endeavor. As you know, research does not stand still, because even after publication, articles can be updated with supplementary data or with corrections, or they may be retracted. Now, such updates to content like retractions, corrections, or withdrawals, they are a normal and expected part of the research and publishing process. Well, generally, it's an editorial decision about the type of update that needs to be made. When such an editorially significant update is made, it's very important that the update is documented. Publishers should report these updates. They should link the outputs with any updates so that anyone who is reading or citing or accessing that content can get to know if the work has been updated or if it has been corrected in any way or whether it's retracted. Helping to maintain a transparent scholarly record is an important part of your role as publishers. It also emphasizes your commitment as a member to the ongoing stewardship of content. It also helps any downstream services that are using open data about retractions for creating any tools or services. So hopefully I have convinced you about the role of post-publication updates for preserving integrity of scholarly record. With this, I would like to hand it over to my colleague Shane, who is now going to tell you how can you actually deposit these with Crossref infrastructure.
There we go. Thank you, Mira. There we go. Just trying to advance the slides. Little glitch there. Um, so yeah, that was a great introduction and context setting for why post-publication updates are so important and important to have them reflected openly, both on your publishing platform or website and in the metadata records that follow your content around through their DOIs. So before we get into the uh, details of how the metadata itself works, I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of kind of the process, the way you should think about managing post-publication updates and making sure that's transparent. Because it's important to know that these kinds of updates to content aren't shameful. They're not bad. They're a completely expected part of the research and publishing process. So uh, there's no there's only good that can come from making them clear and open to everyone. I think the best way to think about this process is to put yourself in the mind of a reader who finds a DOI and a citation somewhere or through a database search, clicks on it to resolve to your content, and they should know that something has happened to that content. They should still be able to access some meaningful information about it. So don't just pull if an article, for example, is withdrawn or retracted, don't just pull it down from your site and make it disappear, because then that when that reader uses the DOI, they'll get to a 404 error and they'll just be lost with uh, no direction for what happened or why that content isn't there anymore. Um, Instead, the DOI should still resolve to, and we'll talk about this later, either a landing page for the article that has prominent update information displayed, or a notification page that has a formal notification about what happened, what got updated. Was it a correction? Was it a retraction? And the specifics. Um, and then also there, in terms of updating the metadata record, the ideal situation, and that's what we'll talk about in a minute, is to indicate the update metadata in this crossmark section of our schema, and there's a formal way to do that. But knowing that that is a little bit too high of a bar technically for some members, there are other ways to indicate the update, which are not best practice, but it's better than not indicating them at all, which is you could remove the author names, you can add withdrawn or retracted or corrected, etc., prominently in the title. You could put a notification in the abstract field, and so it's still at least readily transparent that some update has occurred when the DOI metadata is used by downstream third parties. Um, our schema supports a number of named update types. If you look at the schema, the XML schema or schema documentation, you'll see this list starts with addendum. The most commonly used ones are correction, erratum, retraction, corrigendum, expression of concern, and withdrawal. We don't offer like very strict definitions of what each of those means, because we find that in practice, different publishers and different editors treat them a little bit differently. Some people prefer erratum, some people prefer correction. Like there's a little bit of slippage in between these terms, so it's ultimately a kind of editorial decision and up to your own editorial policy which update types you're going to apply. Um, the main distinction that we run into is really between retractions and withdrawals, where retractions are usually initiated by the editors and withdrawals are usually initiated by the authors, but that's not even 100% true in those cases. So we get a lot of questions like, oh, exactly what is a expression of concern? It's kind of ultimately up to you. It's not a thing we can offer a strict definition for. When are post-publication updates recommended? So when is a change a big enough deal that you should go through this process, post a notification, update the metadata? And what we say for that is when the change to your content is significant enough to impact either the interpretation of the content or who's credited with authorship. So you missed an author and need to add an author name, that's important because it impacts the crediting. Um, if there was a typo, you can change the typo without going through this process, unless the typo was like in a p-value or like a major like a number or a term that was so crucial to the interpretation of the work that when you fix that typo, the interpretation changes. In that case, even though it might seem like a small change editorially, it's a big enough change that it should come with a post-publication update. So let's look into how our metadata schema is designed to support uh, post-publication updates. You may have heard of our Crossmark service, and I'll go into that in more detail later. But I really want to stress that you don't have to use that Crossmark service in order to supply update metadata. Um, if you look at the schema, you'll see where the update metadata goes is in a section called Crossmark, and that's for historical reasons. The way that the Crossmark service was invented first before we started. Well, the Crossmark service was designed for this kind of update information, but at this point, we it's more important to get the update metadata in place than it is to use the whole Crossmark service. Um, and so you can sort of uh, ignore the fact that that tag there is called Crossmark if you're not using Crossmark. If it doesn't pertain to you, you don't have to kind of worry about the Crossmark specific aspects. Um, you can just utilize that metadata tag just to get the update information in there. Um, in the XML that you submit when you're supplying uh, update metadata, if you submit XML directly, there's two ways to get these updates in. Ultimately, it all comes down to XML, but if you're submitting XML directly, you would construct it this way. We have a web form that you can enter the metadata manually, and it will transform it into XML and submit it. If you're not in the if you don't have the technical capacity to construct and submit the XML itself. So there's two required components. One is this crossmark policy tag, which requires a DOI. And again, this is for historical reasons. Uh, that have to do with how the Crossmark service was designed. If you don't use the Crossmark service and don't have a policy page that has a DOI registered for it, there still needs to be a DOI in those tags. So what we suggest is you repeat the DOI of the item being updated in that spot. And it's just to kind of get around that technical requirement. And then the other required component is that update tag, which in turn has to have a type. And that's one of those types I listed before, like errata, withdrawal, retraction, the date the update occurred on, and then again, within the tag itself, the DOI being updated. Um, there are, broadly speaking, two ways to handle updates in metadata. And this, I think, is the most confusing part of the whole thing. So if this doesn't immediately make sense, completely reasonable. It took me a few times to really sort it out. There's what are called in situ updates, which tend to be for kind of smaller changes where you'll have a DOI already registered for the item being updated. And an in situ update, it means in place. You'll make the change right on the landing page of that item itself. So if a slight typo is fixed or a slight change was made and you want to issue a correction, but it's not according to your editorial policy something that requires a correction notice. You can make the change right in place. The DOI will stay the same, and the metadata will go in the DOI of that original item. That's an in situ update. Generally speaking, it's the less recommended way to go about it, but it is simpler. Um, the other option is an update with a formal notice. So if you retract something, you would issue a retraction notice. That notice would be registered with its own DOI, separate from the DOI of the item, the original item that is being retracted. And in that case, the update metadata goes into the DOI of the retraction notice, and it points back in that update tag to the DOI of the original item. This is the most like complex thing that we're going to get to. So I think if you've got this down, we're good to go. So that's how updates are handled when you issue a formal notice. If you use our web deposit form, our manual metadata entry form, um, updates are supported there. So this is if you don't if you register your DOIs using the web deposit form or using one of our other manual metadata tools, or you register them, for example, using OJS, but don't have the capacity to kind of construct or edit your own XML directly. As a one-off, if you're just making an update to one item, you can go into the web deposit form. The problem here, it's not a problem, but the way this is designed that is not perfectly ideal is that you have to re-enter all the metadata for that item. You can't just go in and add add the update metadata. You have to re-enter the title and the authors and everything else. And uh, that takes time. No one likes data entry particularly. And if, for example, you had the OJS plugin that registered that submits your metadata when you register your DOIs, when you re-enter in the web deposit form, is it going to be as perfectly accurate as the metadata from OJS? Maybe not. Human error occurs. So this isn't something we recommend for like constant use, but for a one-off item, it's perfectly adequate. If you're on the form and you're entering all your metadata, you'll come to a part after the GUI and URL that says add Crossref metadata. You can click on that. The form will expand. It will expand with a lot of optional fields that, again, have to do with the Crossmark service. But since we're only talking about just getting in that update metadata, you only have to supply those same three things that I mentioned before. A policy page DOI and take that in, policy page. It doesn't have to be a policy page DOI. You can instead use a repeat of the DOI being updated, an update date, and an update type. So that's all you need to add. You can leave all these other fields blank. They're not required. They don't really pertain to anything unless you're implementing the full Crossmark service. So what about other ways to do this? Where you're always asked about, how to add update metadata and particularly how to implement the Crossmark service using for OJS users. Um, OJS is not our product, so we're not in charge of what happens, how it evolves and what features are added. We know that there are a lot of people who want this. We're in touch with PKP, the organization that produces OJS, and they know that a lot of people want this. So we're hoping that in the future that will be supported, but it's not something we have a time frame around or can promise you when it will happen. We also, you might know, have a new manual metadata entry tool called, well, it was called the record registration form, but we rebranded it to the new metadata manager, which replaces the old metadata manager. And hopefully, as we evolve it, will replace the web deposit form and has a nicer interface. And it, crucially for this purpose, has a feature where if you're just adding metadata to an already registered DOI, you can just enter that DOI and the form will pre-populate with all the metadata that pertains to it. And you could, once we have support for post-publication updates on that form, you could just import all the metadata that exists, add the update metadata, and re-export it without having to retype everything and re-enter in manually all the rest of the metadata record. The form will do that for you. So we're working on that. We plan to have that supported sometime this year. Um, and that again might be a nicer, more convenient option for OJS users who want to add update metadata, either as a one-off for just the things that are updated or for everything, um, if they want to implement Crossmark. Um, yeah, so that's the kind of gist of how the metadata works for post-publication updates. Um, I wanted to go over the Crossmark service now, um, which we can think of as related to, but not the same thing as post-publication update metadata. Crossmark exists because updates are presented to the world in inconsistent ways. Sometimes readers notices them, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're like buried in three tabs that you have to click on in order to find that information. Sometimes they're not there at all. And this is especially true if you've downloaded a PDF of the content and then something changes after you have that PDF. How would you possibly know that that change occurred? Um, so these are some examples of how updates are presented out in the world. You can see the inconsistencies. This is a correction. It's fairly prominently placed, and you can click on it to see the correction notice. This is an item that had a correction, and you wouldn't have any idea that it's there. I mean, there is a Crossmark link, but it is not prominent. These are two examples of retractions. One has a notice, the other does not. So this is just an example of the kind of inconsistency that exists. Excuse me. So Crossmark is a solution to that inconsistency. It displays update information consistently via the use of this check for updates button or check for updates logo that is displayed on landing pages and crucially also on PDFs. And this is one of the ways that it solves the problem is that if the link to the Crossmark data is embedded in a PDF, a user who's reading that, item can click through the PDF to check whether that um, everything is still up to date before they, for example, cite that work. So this is an example of what Crossmark looks like in use. You can see on the left side the check for updates button. When you click it, you can see that document. On the right is the dialog that will either pop up or link out into a new tab or window that shows you the document is current. It also will optionally display other information about the publication. Um, Again, another example of how Crossmark works in use. This is an example of an item with a correction, and you can see there's a different design element, different color that appears to indicate a correction, and also an item with a retraction that's displayed in red. And from that dialog that appears, you can click out to view the retraction notice, and that has more information. It should ideally explain why the retraction occurred. Um, and it also importantly displays the DOI of the update policy. So when an update has happened, users can see, oh, what are the editorial policies that are being used by this journal or this publisher? So there are a lot of additional steps to implement Crossmark. I think in the past we've been it's a great service and really useful, and we're enthusiastic about all our services. And I think sometimes that enthusiasm eclipses some of the technical hurdles to making it happen, and I don't want to do that. I want to make it clear that this is hard, and we know that, and we're working on ways to make it easier. So it's, at the moment, probably implementing Crossmark is not going to be accessible to every single member just due to technical constraints. We're hoping to develop more tooling to, especially that new metadata manager tool that will make it more accessible. Um, so the additional requirements are that you need a policy page that explains your editorial policies around updates, and that page needs a DOI, and that update page DOI goes into the metadata of every publication. And that's really like the biggest hurdle is that you have to include, it's not in this case post-publication update metadata, it's crossmark metadata that just shows the policy page DOI for every publication, even ones that have no updates. That's how when someone clicks on the crossmark check for updates button, it will display, it will display showing that the item is current, that there are no updates. Because in order to facilitate that, there has to be crossmark metadata for every item. In addition, you have to have editorial control over your landing page or platform, and then to facilitate the button working, you'll need to add a DC identifier meta tag, which indicates the DOI of that item in the HTML source code, and add a JavaScript snippet that will make that button work with a pop-up um, dialog. Optionally, if you prefer not to have the JavaScript snippet, you could add a static link over the Crossmark logo, which will link out to that same dialog, but it won't be a pop-up, it will be a new tab or a new window. Um, then, yeah, so you have to add that check for updates link to that same Crossmark information to all of your full text PDFs. And, crucially, add whenever updates do occur, you'll need to resubmit updated metadata to indicate those updates, so that when users click the check for updates button, they'll get that yellow box for corrections or the red for retractions or withdrawals. So it is a matter of kind of regular maintenance and being aware to, and it changes the DOI registration workflow for all of your content. And because there's a lot of confusion about this is just a reminder that Crossmark is intended to be a way to display update information uh, in a consistent manner to users. It's not there to be a stamp of approval, or indicate anything about the quality of your content. It's not there to indicate that you participate in Crossref. We do have logos if you want to put a logo on your website that says you're a Crossref member. We have that kind of branding that you're welcome to use, but that's not what Crossmark is for. Crossmark is really just about getting information about updates out to users. Um, yeah, so that's all I have prepared, but I'm happy to answer any questions about uh, Crossmark or update metadata. If we want to look at more examples of how that metadata works in detail, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Shane. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A box right now. So if any of you have any questions, if you have tried implementing Crossmark, or if you have tried to deposit post-publication updates, and if you have any questions, please do feel free to add them in the Q&A box. I do see a hand up from one of our attendees, and I was wondering if you had a question. So I'm going to try to unmute you, Jesslyn, and see if you would want to ask a question. Jesslyn, I see that you have your hand up, so I've unmuted you. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask? Okay, if you have a question, please feel free to add it in the Q&A box and we can pick it up from there. I have a question for you, Shane.
Sure.
Do you want to share a little bit more about what are some of the common questions that you get that members run into when they are trying to deposit post-publication updates and trying to link, let's say, retraction notices or any other corrected or updated content with the original content?
Um, we get a lot of questions about, like I said, the exact definitions for each of the update types. Um, there is some confusion about, where the update goes, especially in that instance where you have a notice, like a correction notice, retraction notice, and like it's a little unintuitive to put the update in the notice and point back to the original item. I think for a lot of people, the intuitive process would be to put the update in the original item of metadata and point to the notice, which you can do as well. You can do both, but it's really the former that's the required one. Um, Yeah, I mean, honestly, our biggest question is we have a lot of OJS users, and OJS is great. And if because OJS is sort of a one-stop shop for both the hosting platform and the metadata and the manuscript submission process too, but that's not related to this. Um, it would be perfect for Crossmark, really, like because it could make the necessary changes on the landing page and in the metadata kind of in one swoop if it were, if I understand why from their perspective that's a high bar, it's a technical challenge. But that would be such a nice complete solution. So we get a lot of questions from OJS users like when can we do Crossmark? And unfortunately I have to tell them not that way, not yet. But you can still uh, add post-publication update metadata either by OJS has the option to instead of the typical workflow is that OJS users will configure their metadata plugin to automatically send metadata to Crossref as soon as an article is published. But you can instead, or on occasion, if you want, uh, export the metadata and submit it to Crossref yourself. So if you know a little XML, or we can walk you through that, the changes you'd need to make to an XML file to reflect an update. You can export the XML from OJS, open it in a text editor, manually enter that little crossmark section with the update information, and then upload it to Crossref. For That's very reasonable to do for like one-off item that gets updated here and there. It's a much bigger hurdle to do for every single item if you want to implement the Crossmark service. So um, that there's at this moment a kind of I think the comfortable middle ground for OJS users would be give us update metadata when things are updated, but wait until OJS supports Crossmark to try to implement full-on Crossmark, unless you're extremely motivated. Um, yeah.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you for elaborating on that.
We also have, a documentation site that has a bunch. It has like, step-by-step instructions for what you need to do for Crossmark and examples of different kinds of updates and what they look like in XML and the landing pages. So that can be a good resource as well. Obviously, if you have any questions, contact us uh, at support@crossref.org. You can ask for me individually if you want, but all of my colleagues on the support team are also great and would be happy to help you.
Thanks, Shane. I'd encourage our attendees to ask any questions if they have any questions about how should they be using the Crossmark service or how should they deposit retraction metadata. We will be sharing the slides and the recording afterwards, so stay tuned for that. All right, I'm not seeing anything else in the chat or in the Q&A box. So if there are no more questions or any final thoughts from any of my co-hosts, Shane or Amanda, then we can close this. Thank you so much again to everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, Shane, for okay. I think there's one question, so I'm happy to take that. There's a question of is it possible to use Crossmark only for future articles and not for those that have already been published?
Um, yes. You're not, we don't have an obligation around it. We, so you could say, from this point forward, we're going to indicate whether there have been updates or not for all articles, going forward. And you're not obliged to go back and add that same service for your prior articles. Um, we would encourage it, but it's not an obligation.
Thank you, Shane.
The
I
the
just
real
want to.
important thing is that if you're going to use Crossmark, it needs to apply to all your articles or all your content if it's not journal content, whether or not they have updates. Because we want people to be able to see, oh, this thing is up to date. It's conversely also important. We see this sometimes that there are sometimes members who are so enthusiastic about Crossmark and they undertake this big project to get the Crossmark up and running on all of their content. And then everything forever just says it's up to date and they never supply and they never come back and, indicate when things have been updated, which seems, maybe they've never had an update, but that seems unlikely. So it's important that you do both, tell us when things are up to date, but also tell us when things are not, when they've changed.
Yeah, that's true. That's really important. We have another question here, which is on a slightly different topic. So there's a question about I would like to understand how does the process of citation works. If it's not relevant here, is there any webinar on that? We currently don't have a webinar planned for that. We do have some documentation on the website, but I wonder, Shane, do you want to share anything quickly about it, about the process of citation, how that works?
Yeah. So that also works through metadata, and that is references metadata. Another references are optional but strongly encouraged. So that means when you're, for example, submitting metadata for a journal article, you would include in the metadata record um, all of the items that that article cites. So a reference list, and we assume you have reference lists for most of your content, and can package that information up in through either XML or one of the other tools that are used for metadata submission. We have a tool called Simple Text Query that's designed specifically for kind of manual reference submission. Um, and when you submit references for an article, our system, when we process that metadata, checks each of those references to see does it match the metadata record for another item that's also registered in Crossref. And if we can match a reference to the thing it references, the thing it cites, we'll assert a citation for that. We'll match the two together, and that's part of the research nexus as well, is linking together, items that cite other items, items that are cited by so that's how our that's how we assert that citation, and how we it will increment and display a citation count in the metadata record for everything that's registered with Crossref. That's where those citation counts come from, is the references for the things that the citing works. Um,
Can I ask Shane, is that in the metadata, is that the is referenced by?
that's
Yeah.
not a relationship. It is called a citation list. So
Ah,
I mean it's technically a relationship, but it's not part of the relationship schema. Um, but yeah, in the schema, the section is called citation list, and so for uh each reference, you can supply references in three ways. You can supply just if you know the DOI of the thing being referenced, you can just give us the DOI. That's easy. It will ensure a citation match. If you have the reference just like as a formatted citation, like using whichever citation style your journal uses, you can give us that as just a text string of that full formatted citation, and our system it has a pretty cool sophisticated way to parse that into its constituent parts and say, oh, this looks like the author, let's search for all the things with this author, this looks like the title. Um, and or if you have the capacity, or your platform hosting platform has the capacity, you can mark up those references. You can tag the parts yourself, and that's called we call that a structured reference. Um, and yeah, those can be situated in the XML. If you create the XML yourself, they can be just copy pasted into the metadata manager tool, or copy pasted into the simple text query tool, and they'll just be sent through in metadata record. And so it's the thing about citations is it's a collective effort, right? You put the citations in for your content, and that means all the other publishers' content that your content cites get to benefit from that information. Their citation counts go up, and then other publishers that cite your content do the same, and it's all kind of a group project. Um, so yeah, that's we we can't make it required because not everything has references, but it's very, very strongly encouraged.
Thank you, Shane, for taking that on and for the detailed explanation.
No problem.
Can give it a couple more minutes if there are any other questions that anybody has.
And I think we do have past recordings of past webinars about references and the cited by service up on our events and webinars page. So I don't, it's not, the technical specs of that haven't changed. So even if they're several years old, those might be of use or interest.
Please feel free to check out our website for past recordings of webinars on this and other topics which you might find useful. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing that link to a past webinar. Thank you so much, Shane, for leading us through this topic today. I'm sure everybody in the audience appreciated hearing about that. I also want to thank everybody who joined in today. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this was a useful session for you.
Thanks for hosting and organizing. Thanks for everyone attending. And thanks,
Absolutely.
Amanda, for managing our chat and Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much, Amanda. right, if there are no more questions, I want to wish a wonderful day to all of you. Thank you again for joining today's session. Bye all.